The door of the grand chamber slammed shut behind her, echoing through the cold stone walls like a final verdict. Jeanne stood trembling, her silk sleeves torn where the king had pushed her away. "Don't you understand?" Louis's voice cut through the air. "Besides being ugly, you also smell." The laughter of courtiers burned in her ears, sharper than any blade. She didn't cry, she couldn't. She only stared at him, the man she had prayed for since girlhood now staring back with disgust, as if she were something unholy. He turned his back and whispered something to his advisor, who smirked and opened the doors wider. Jeanne felt every eye in the room slice through her pride. Her wedding crown slipped, clinking onto the marble floor. No one moved to help her pick it up. Not one hand reached out. As she walked away, her steps slow and heavy, she heard the king order the servants to open every window. "The air stinks of pity," he said. The laughter returned, cruel and hollow. Jeanne's hands clenched. In that moment, something inside her changed. The part of her that begged for love died. Later that night, the maids whispered that they heard her talking alone in the chapel. No candles burned, yet her shadow moved across the walls. One maid swore she saw Jeanne touch the stone altar and whisper, "If I am ugly to him, let him see the beauty of his sins." The next morning, the king's favorite horse was found dead outside the stables, its eyes wide open, its nostrils filled with the scent of roses, the same perfume Jeanne wore on her wedding night. The king laughed it off, but that night when he went to bed, the scent of those roses filled his room again, and someone unseen whispered in the dark, "You shouldn't have called her ugly." Louis sat upright in bed, his chest pounding. The whisper still echoed in his mind. He shouted for the guards, but when they burst into the room, there was no one there, only the faint smell of burned roses. The captain looked uneasy. "Your Majesty, shall we check the corridors?" But the king waved him away, pretending not to care. He couldn't admit it, the voice had sounded like hers, Jeanne's. In the morning, he ordered the chapel sealed. "She's not to pray there any more," he said coldly, but when they entered, they found something strange. The statue of the Virgin had tears on its cheeks, black streaks like ash. No candle was lit, no smoke nearby. The priest crossed himself and whispered, "It's a sign." Meanwhile, Jeanne was silent, calm, even kind to the maids who feared her. But her eyes, they had changed. She no longer looked at people. She looked through them. One evening, as she brushed her hair, her mirror cracked right down the middle. "It's just glass," she murmured, touching her reflection, "but it breaks like truth." That same night, the king's advisor, Lord Beaumont, woke to find his chamber filled with soft music, the same wedding hymn played at Jeanne's ceremony. A cold wind brushed his neck, though all windows were closed. He stumbled toward the door, but before he reached it, the candles went out one by one. When the guards found him at dawn, he was alive, but something had taken his voice. His throat bore a faint red mark, shaped like a woman's hand. The king tried to hide it. He told everyone Beaumont had fallen ill, but whispers spread faster than his lies. Some said the cursed queen prayed for mercy. Others said she prayed for revenge. And when the court physician visited Jeanne, he swore he saw something move behind her shadow, as if another figure stood there, smiling. That night, the king dreamed of a voice calling him again, soft, broken, and close to his ear. "Louis, when you called me ugly, you cursed yourself." He woke up gasping, his hands covered in rose petals. Louis sat at breakfast the next morning, his hands shaking as he lifted his cup. The courtiers around him pretended not to notice. The petals had been swept away before dawn, yet he could still smell them, sweet, heavy, and wrong. He forced a smile when his new bride, Anne of Brittany, entered the room. She was everything Jeanne was not: beautiful, graceful, adored. But when Anne sat beside him, she frowned. "Why does this room smell like perfume?" she asked softly. "It's suffocating." Louis froze. No one else could smell it. He laughed it off, pretending not to hear the soft hum beneath the silence, a hum that sounded almost like Jeanne's wedding song. Later that day, a servant came running to the king's chamber, trembling. "Sire, the wall in the chapel, it's burned. There is a shadow there, a woman's shape." The king's face turned pale. "Erase it," he said. "Repaint the wall. No one must speak of it." But the painter refused. He said the shadow bled through every layer of paint. Even when he used lime and ash, it came back darker. The shape looked like a woman kneeling, her head bowed. her hands clasped as if in prayer. That night, thunder rolled across the sky. Louis couldn't sleep. He heard footsteps in the corridor, soft and uneven. The door creaked open, and a maid appeared, soaked to the skin. "Your Majesty," she whispered. "I saw her." "Who?" he demanded. "The Queen, the first one." The maid's voice broke. She was standing in the rain outside the chapel, but her eyes were open milky white. She said, "Your name?" Louis grabbed his sword and ran into the courtyard. The rain hit his face like cold stones. He saw nothing, only the chapel door slightly ajar. He stepped inside. Candles lit themselves as he entered, one by one. On the altar lay a single rose, black as ink, dripping red water. And carved into the stone beneath it were words he didn't recognize, but when he touched them, his fingers burned. From somewhere deep in the chapel came a whisper, "You wanted beauty, Louis. Look at what it costs." The next morning, Louis ordered the chapel locked and guarded. No one was to enter without his command, but fear had already settled over the castle. Servants walked in silence, avoiding mirrors and dark corners. At night, they swore they heard footsteps following them, slow, dragging, as if someone moved barefoot on stone. Jeanne had been sent away weeks ago to a distant abbey, or so they thought, yet her name lingered on every tongue, whispered like a curse. One stable boy claimed he saw her carriage on the road the night before, but it carried no horses. It just glided through the fog. Louis tried to drown the unease in wine and celebration. He ordered another feast to prove his strength. The hall was lit with hundreds of candles, golden banners fluttered, and Anne smiled politely, pretending not to see the tension in her husband's face. But halfway through the feast the laughter died. A servant dropped a tray. Everyone turned. On the floor beside the spilled wine lay a small crown, Jeanne's old wedding crown, the one she had dropped the night he called her ugly. Louis stood slowly. "Who brought this here?" His voice shook. No one answered. Then, before anyone could speak, a single candle at the far end of the hall flickered and went out. The others followed, one by one, until the room was swallowed in darkness. From somewhere among the shadows, a woman's voice sang soft, trembling, but full of grief. The same song Jeanne had sung when she walked down the aisle. Anne screamed. The guests ran for the doors, pushing, shouting. Louis stood frozen, staring at the faint glow that appeared at the center of the hall, Jeanne's crown, burning with blue flame. When the guards finally entered with torches, the crown was gone. But the floor beneath the king's chair had changed color, blackened, scorched in the shape of a woman's handprint. That night, Louis couldn't close his eyes. Every time he blinked, he saw that crown and heard Jeanne's voice whispering, "You took my crown, but I still wear your shame." That evening, Louis tried to hide in his private chambers, hoping the castle's walls could protect him. But no door, no lock, no guard could stop what was coming. As he paced, the air grew thick, sweet with the scent of roses, yet rotten underneath the same perfume Jeanne had worn on her wedding night. A faint tapping echoed against the window. He approached, thinking it was the wind, but saw nothing outside. Then a shadow fell across the floor, tall, thin, unmistakably human. He drew his sword, but the figure didn't move. It hovered silent, yet its presence made the hair on his neck rise. "Louis." The voice whispered, low and cold, curling into his mind like smoke. "Do you remember my face?" He swung the sword blindly. It passed through air, through the shadow, and he felt a cold burn on his palm as though he had struck a living thing. The voice laughed, soft, mocking, sorrowful all at once. "Ugly, smelly, you called me that, remember." Then came a knock, not on the door, but inside the chamber itself. The mirrors reflected nothing but Louis's pale, horrified face. Until he blinked, Jeanne was there. Not alive, but not fully dead either. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Her twisted smile revealed teeth that glimmered like sharp porcelain. Louis fell to his knees. "No, this cannot be real. You made it real," she whispered. "You made me nothing, and now nothing watches you." The candlelight flickered violently, shadows dancing along the walls like tortured spirits. A gust of wind blew through the chamber, carrying with it dozens of black petals. They swirled around Louis until he could hardly breathe. Each petal burned where it touched his skin, leaving faint red marks shaped like hands. By dawn, the guards found him slumped in the corner, pale and trembling. His lips moved, whispering her name over and over. Jean's shadow disappeared, but the scent remained, sweet, rotten, and everywhere. From that day forward, every corridor, every chapel, every mirror in the castle held a trace of her, a reminder that Louis's cruelty had awakened something far beyond human punishment. Weeks passed, yet the castle grew colder with each night. Courtiers began whispering about Jeanne, calling her the ghost bride who could not rest. The king tried to dismiss it, laughed it off during meals, and even flaunted his new queen, Anne, hoping to bury the fear under grandeur and ceremony. But Anne noticed things Louis could not deny. Candles that should burn flickered and died around him. Mirrors in their private chambers reflected shadows that weren't theirs. Servants complained of footsteps following them when no one was there. And sometimes, in the dead of night, a soft melody drifted through the halls Jean's wedding hymn, sung by a voice that could not belong to the living. One evening, Louis stormed into the library, desperate to prove control. He grabbed the oldest records he could find, trying to uncover some secret that would explain this madness. And there, pressed between dusty pages, he found it. A note written in Jean's hand long before their marriage. "They will see me as ugly, they will call me foul, but the blood in me does not forget. It does not forgive." A shiver ran down his spine as the words seemed to writhe on the page. Then he noticed the ink dark, almost wet, and spreading like a shadow across the parchment. As he reached to close the book, the words rearranged themselves, and now, "You will see what it costs to mock me." The candles blew out, darkness swallowed the room, Louis's breath came in gasps. From the shadows, the air thickened, carrying the scent of roses, smoke, and something faintly metallic blood. A whisper echoed, close to his ear, "I warned you." He stumbled backward, tripping over the books. When he looked up, the ghostly figure of Jeanne hovered above the library floor, her face pale, her eyes glowing, her twisted smile wider than before. She raised a hand, pointing directly at him, and the shadows around her writhed like living things. Louis screamed, but the walls swallowed the sound. The king realized in a horrifying moment of clarity that he had not married a woman he had awakened a curse. That night, the king could not sleep. Every corner of his chambers felt alive, every mirror reflected not him, but Jeanne's pale, twisted face. Even Anne cowered beside him, clutching her hands as if they could protect her from what had been unleashed. Louis tried to regain control. He summoned priests, exorcists, anyone who could rid the castle of the haunting. They arrived in solemn robes, candles in hand, crosses held high, but when they entered the chapel, their knees buckled. The altar was drenched in black petals, and the shadows on the walls moved as if alive. One priest cried out, This is not a spirit, this is vengeance." The figure of Jeanne appeared, her form flickering between fragile woman and something far more sinister. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. Every curse she carried, every humiliation he had inflicted, pulsed from her like a heartbeat in the air. Louis tried to flee, but the castle itself seemed to conspire against him. Doors slammed, corridors twisted, and the familiar hallways became a maze of darkness. Wherever he turned, he saw her eyes glowing, accusing, unyielding. Anne screamed as a black petal landed on her shoulder and burned through her dress. Louis grabbed her, shielding her, but even that could not stop the suffocating presence. A voice whispered, low and sharp, "You thought you could erase me, but I am here, in every stone, in every shadow." By dawn, the priests fled, unable to continue. Louis was left alone with the memory of his cruelty, the echo of her words, and the unmistakable knowledge that Jeanne's vengeance was far from over. The king realized that power, wealth, and title could not save him. His only hope, if there was any, was to survive long enough to understand what Jeanne wanted. Days turned into weeks, and the castle grew quieter, but the fear never left Louis. He wandered the halls like a man trapped in a nightmare. Servants refused to enter certain rooms, claiming they heard whispers calling their names or footsteps pacing behind them when no one was there. Louis tried to assert control again. He summoned Anne and demanded they hold a grand feast to distract the court. The tables were laden with food, candles flickered, and musicians played as if nothing had happened. Yet as the king raised his goblet to toast, a single black rose appeared in the center of the table. He froze. The rose had no vase, no water, and yet it thrived, petals opening slowly as if breathing. The musician stopped mid-note. The guests shivered. A soft, familiar voice drifted through the hall. "Ugly, foul, you cannot hide from me." Louis dropped the goblet, shattering it. Wine spread across the floor like dark blood. The guests screamed as shadows lengthened unnaturally across the walls, twisting into Jeanne's pale, accusing face over and over again. Anne tried to leave, but the doors slammed shut on their own. Louis realized then that the curse was no longer contained, it had grown stronger, fed by his fear and guilt. From the shadows, Jeanne's laughter rang out, echoing through every stone, every hallway, every heart in the room. Louis felt it crawl under his skin, wrapping around his chest, and then the crown appeared again, floating above the table, black petals raining down around it, a faint glow illuminating the room. Louis fell to his knees. "You wanted beauty," the voice whispered, "and now you see the cost of cruelty." That night Louis barely slept. Every creak of the castle, every gust of wind against the windows, sounded like Jeanne's footsteps following him. He tried to speak to Anne to reassure her, but his own voice trembled. Even she seemed changed, her eyes wide with unspoken terror. In the dead of night, a servant rushed to his chambers, pale and shaking. "Sire, someone's in the chapel, she's praying." Louis grabbed a torch and ran. The chapel doors were wide open, though he had ordered them sealed days ago. Inside, the altar was surrounded by blackened rose petals, and Jeanne knelt there, or perhaps her spirit did. Her face was calm, almost mournful, yet her eyes glowed with a light that pierced his soul. "You called me ugly," the voice whispered, carried by the wind that shouldn't have entered. "You humiliated me, and yet, you are still here." Louis felt cold hands brush his shoulders. He spun, swinging his torch, but the flame passed through nothing. The candles flared violently, casting shadows that seemed alive. Around him the walls pulsed, the stone itself groaning as if alive. Anne clutched his arm, trembling. "Louis, what is she?" He couldn't answer. Jeanne's image flickered across every surface, mirrors, windows, even the polished floor. She wasn't just a ghost, she had become the castle itself, an inescapable presence. Suddenly, the crown appeared above the altar again, suspended in midair, petals slowly raining down. They burned slightly where they touched the floor, leaving a path that led directly toward Louis. He wanted to flee, but his legs refused. His throat tightened. The voice of Jeanne whispered one final warning before fading. "You wanted beauty, now you will live with my truth." By dawn, Louis could barely stand. The castle was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. Courtiers whispered that Jeanne's presence could be felt in every corner, a cold weight pressing down on the walls. Even the new Queen Anne moved cautiously, eyes darting to shadows that flickered where none should exist. Louis wandered into the chapel, drawn by a compulsion he could not explain. The black petals had returned, forming a circle around the altar. The air smelled of roses, decayed yet sweet, and the faint glow of Jeanne's crown hovered above it. He reached out, and the flame cast his own shadow long and distorted across the stone floor, but in it, he saw not himself, but Jeanne kneeling, staring directly at him. A voice, soft but firm, spoke in his ear, "You cannot escape what you have done." He fell to his knees, tears streaming. What do you want from me?" The crown tilted slightly, and petals drifted down, landing on his shoulders. Each petal burned lightly, leaving marks that would not fade. Then came the final twist. A mirror in the chapel, previously covered, shattered on its own. In each shard, Jeanne's face appeared smiling, mournful, and accusing, while Louis's own reflection twisted, horrified. Anne screamed as one shard floated toward her, spinning midair before falling harmlessly at her feet. Louis realized then that Jeanne's power was no longer tied to her form or life. She was everywhere: the castle, the shadows, the air, the mirrors. He bowed his head, knowing the king who had humiliated her was gone. Only the man who feared every corner of his own castle remained, and in that fear he understood the cruelest truth. Jeanne's vengeance was not complete. Somewhere, deep in the shadows, her whisper floated, "This is only the beginning, until you see me everywhere." Months passed, and the castle had changed completely. The halls were quieter, the windows often fogged, and servants walked like ghosts themselves. Louis rarely left his chambers, haunted by shadows that twisted around him at every step. Anne tried to comfort him, but even she recoiled when the scent of roses sweet, decayed filled the air without warning. One evening, Louis thought he might finally be free. The chapel was empty, the crown gone, and no whispers had come for days. He walked through the corridors, heart heavy but hopeful. Then, from the darkness, a soft giggle echoed light, cruel, and impossibly close. He froze. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, behind the tapestries, beneath the floorboards, even in his own reflection. Faint glow appeared, swirling in the air like mist. Louis's breath caught as the mist condensed into Jeanne's form, no longer fragile, but terrifyingly whole, hovering above the stone floor. "You thought absence would end me," she whispered. "You thought distance would save you." Louis tried to speak, but his voice failed. Jeanne raised her hand, and all the candles in the castle blew out simultaneously. Darkness pressed in like water, suffocating, moving. Louis stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The shadows on the floor writhed and stretched, forming shapes of the courtiers who had laughed at her, the advisers who had whispered behind her back, all screaming silently. Final petal fell on his chest, burning lightly, and Jeanne's voice, soft but absolute, whispered, "I am everywhere, and now you will never forget me." Louis realized in that moment that the king who had lived arrogantly and cruelly was no more. Only the man who trembled in fear, trapped in his own castle, remained, and Jeanne, immortal, relentless, had claimed her justice.